Is Switch 2 doomed? The Switch 2 was the most hyped machine of forever, launching its advertising with a miraculously huge and glorious Mario Kart title, probably the biggest scale Donkey Kong title ever in the history of the franchise so far. Upraised GameCube titles, Sakurai's long-awaited return to Kirby, and more. And yet, and yet, and within days, all that glorious hope and expectation appears to have crumbled. Nintendo's streams are being spammed with "drop the price." Their tariff-related woes have apparently made the evening news, and they're having to make abrupt changes to their pre-order schedules. Is Nintendo simply doomed? Is this, as one commenter put it recently, proof of the curse of their iterative consoles? Look, there's no doubt about it. This probably has not been the easiest few days for Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa and his plucky band of Nintendo leaders. I think we should prepare for some short-term difficulties, but I do think Nintendo can feel fairly confident in the medium to long term. So, let's break it down. First of all, I'm going to park the issue of tariffs for the time being. I have a full separate video on the impact of those, but the situation is too fast moving to really factor into this too much. Worst case scenario, all consumer electronics in the USA, including Switch 2, will be much more expensive, but as it's going to be the same across the board, Switch 2 will at least have the cover of being just one expensive option among all of them. Moreover, we can't rule out black swan events affecting specific regions or the world over the coming years. In the Switch era, we had a global pandemic, a European war, and several other tough situations that needed managing, such as the 2019 negotiation around the proposed tariff regime in America back then. The next decade may have more disruptive elements to contend with, and Nintendo can't control these. However, there are some things that they can control, and in this respect, I think they have great fundamentals. What are those fundamentals? Firstly, games. I still believe the company are capable of making truly great games that people will want to play. Even though the Wii U flopped, the games themselves were huge long-term assets. Mario Kart 8 is a terrific case in point. It was a big hit relative to the minuscule install base of Wii U, but a seismic hit on Switch. Whether people play them in 2025 or 2023 or even further into the future, my suspicion is that eventually very many people will get their hands on titles like Mario Kart World and others in this presentation because these experiences are going to be awesome and a lot of people genuinely do love Nintendo's products. There is every likelihood that they will continue the drumbeat of amazing titles with new 3D Mario, new Splatoon, and others in the coming years. This is one of the best first 6 months of any home Nintendo console ever in terms of breadth and apparent quality of titles. No previous home console had a mainline Pokemon in the launch window, just for one. All this will ramp up demand for the product itself. Secondly, and unlike the Wii U, whose initial value proposition received a more mixed critical appraisal, the product, from what I can see, is really good. Switch 2 is pretty much exactly what people have asked for all these years, to the extent that Nintendo can provide it. Better graphics and processing, a bigger screen, better memory, more comfortable Joy-Con, an actual system for communication in games, and a few additional quirky features like mouse mode to give it a Nintendo sheen. Sometimes in the past, Nintendo has gambled on the market finding what it has to sell appealing, but they pretty much know that this is appealing, and not least because they let Switch go it alone on the market for so long, ensuring pent-up demand continues apace. Thirdly, Nintendo have built themselves many opportunities to continue to promote these products. There are regular film releases. Just on current trends, it's plausible that 6 of the next 8 years could see a big Nintendo film release, and that's just from the 2 franchises that they've got on their feet so far. Add to this theme parks, the apps, and their increased merchandising presence, and they are a very big step forward from 2017. Now, it's true that they don't have a backup console like they did in the days of the 3DS, but several years of the very successful Switch has led to a run of great profits, and they are sitting on a fair amount of cash. Nintendo is notoriously cautious about such things, and this gives them a buffer now. Of course, they have also spent a lot. All that IP expansion did not come cheap, and they have many more people hired and have a massive new building for the development of staff in the offing. Their standing costs are far higher than in 2014, when Iwata famously guarded the core development jobs, and game development is far more expensive at the current time, but it's also likely to be much further along in progressing towards the next set of big games in many cases. I'm sure development on the next Animal Crossing, the next Splatoon, and the next Mario is fairly advanced. A little less far on the next Zelda perhaps, but still a good way. Dare I say, Nintendo Studios are far more likely to weather bad times and keep ploughing on compared to many other studios, particularly in the West, where routine cycles of mass hirings and then layoffs seem to be the order of the day, which has to be hugely destabilizing. Furthermore, if Nintendo needs to retreat into remakes and remasters of past titles, as it's done before, they still have a huge amount to choose from because they've been at this for a long time. Plus, they appeal to a younger crowd who simply won't have been alive for previous games. They also have other products besides just games. Alamo I expect to be just the first in a broad array of toys and consumer electronics apparatus that Nintendo will seek to put out in the coming years, and it only takes one to break big to support all the rest. All of this puts Nintendo in a position that is relatively secure. In the main, people aren't saying they dislike the product. They aren't saying they dislike the games. They're just saying that they are priced out of the games. It's Nintendo's job under such circumstances to persuade enough people to overcome their skepticism and jump on board while having a long-term plan to convert future would-be customers through other means. These people are angry because in the main they love Nintendo, and so Nintendo should be pushing on an open door to convert them, at least in the medium term, the next several years. I've talked before about the fact that Switch 2's early trajectory doesn't need to be absolutely amazing to stand up decently against the Switch. Switch was coming off the Wii U and had relatively few games to start with it routinely being written off as just a Zelda machine. It had months of supply issues and then went into a 2018 where they were massively reliant on ports. Now, the Switch was always successful, even in the early days, but it was only in 2019 and then the pandemic years that it rocketed into the stratosphere. They have time to watch and wait and see what the market reaction is like. Essentially, the discussions are still around price. For reasons I've discussed separately, Nintendo's pricing decisions may not take into account the audience's ability to pay under straitened global circumstances, but they do reflect broad continuity of prices, inflation adjusted, and if anything, a few concessions that they would consider are designed to be consumer friendly, although they clearly haven't been received that way. I don't think that they will or necessarily can backtrack significantly, and while Nintendo are the first over the top in terms of these prices, I am sure Sony and Microsoft will follow with price hikes at least as aggressive, especially as we approach new console generations. As far as I can see, there are two main paths before us that this could go. The first option is that things continue to putter on more or less as before. Early adopters buy Switch 2 and gradually more people come on board as people become used to the prices, can save up for it, and as Nintendo releases budget alternative models at a gradual pace where necessary to try to ensure a constant flow of systems. It is possible that the take-up rate of Switch 2 could be slower than the Switch, but this has some advantages to Nintendo as well. If Nintendo are suffering on costs, then doubtless Microsoft and Sony will be as well. This means that the top-end consoles may not see progression to new generations as fast, or at least not with such high audience take-up. This means that people will be increasingly looking for middle-tier options, which Switch 2 is eminently well placed to provide, and it also means that more games developed for the home consoles have a shot at being Switch 2 ready, making it a more secure part of the marketplace as it can handle more of the current games being released. If Switch 2 continues at a slower pace, but still a steady pace, and demand for a new generation technologically is dampened because the tech is already at a perfectly serviceable level, then there's no reason for Nintendo to issue a new console, and we could easily see Switch 2 be a main console with some revisions along the way into 2033 or 2034, maybe even 2035. Over this time, it should be possible to lower the price and or increase the margins through a mix of technology and issuing revisions. This is obviously the most benign path. The second path is that the price increases meet a wall of consumer resistance. People severely respond against $80 from Nintendo, bulk at $90 and $100 from Sony and Microsoft, and there is some kind of game industry, well, crash might be a strong term, but I think aggressive realignment might be the thing. Mass layoffs will occur, a few select indie developers who can leverage AI to make incredible games with a fraction of the overheads will become kings of the ash heap and the giants of tomorrow. The legacy companies will become IP warehouses, pivoting towards film and media, leveraging old IPs for multimedia deals. Hollywood already seems to be in its video game era, and I expect that to only continue now that they have run the well of comics dry. Sony, Microsoft, EA, and others may well get on the train of AI assisted or, in time, flat out AI led programming, but they will be less nimble than indies can be, and so I would expect it to be a quite febrile transitionary time with a new generation of games that are very good and probably far cheaper than you would expect. This will create a divide between those who want authentic, handcrafted experiences made with true artistry and passion and humanity, and those who are happy with content precision optimized for your pleasure by the most advanced artificial intelligences in the history of the world. In such a world, the most dangerous option is probably to try and straddle the fence. Marketing expert Rory Sutherland uses the example of a hotel. You could have a hotel where there is amazing customer service, where people meet you and take your bag, show you to your room, are there at the drop of a hat, and do absolutely everything for you. You could also have a hotel which is completely automated, where you can use your phone to access it, you don't have to see another living person even. They're completely opposite experiences, but both will have an appeal in their own way because they fulfill a niche. Now, in this race, Nintendo has picked its sides. They are carrying on the historic work of the Kyoto artisans. They may even find that once again they need to pivot to making their creatives, at least at a senior level, more public facing to give people confidence that there are people working with love and care behind their initiatives. But the Nintendo Switch 2 can potentially run any game, and so they stand to make a margin even on those cheap AI games as well as on their original content. The hit to Sony and Microsoft businesses could be far greater. Nintendo alone can make Nintendo games, and while Palworld may presage a greater move towards imitative experiences, Nintendo's reputation is still important. It's tough, but it's possible to see how Nintendo could come out ahead in such a world if they stick with the path and just power through. They eat lower sales up front and commit to having a vast array of games early on so that when the hammer falls, they are in a really strong position. A lot of this comes down to demand. The video game industry is huge and people love playing games. Generally, even in recessionary times, spending on video games tends to be quite well protected. I have covered this far more extensively in other videos, which I will link at the end, but essentially, in a recessionary environment, people move to cheaper forms of entertainment. Now, $80 may be more expensive than many other gaming choices so far, but for a family of four taking a day trip somewhere with fuel prices, tickets, food costs, and so on, it is likely to be at least as much as the price of Super Mario Party Jamboree Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, and the game will probably keep people entertained far, far longer. Gaming represents a rather low cost per hour compared to many other entertainment forms, and I expect that to continue to be the case. This is why historically Iwata noted that recessionary environments don't tend to significantly impact Nintendo's performance. We also have to remember that it's very difficult to distinguish signal from noise. Take Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. There are many people who are more casual but interested Pokemon fans who decided to wait out the game due to the apparent performance issues. I'm one of them. I dare say one of these days I will get the Switch 2 edition and catch up, but I'm far more a casual Pokemon fan than I am of other Nintendo franchises, so it didn't hurt too much. Still, it was a sale lost to Nintendo and the Pokemon Company. But that didn't stop Scarlet and Violet selling eye-wateringly large numbers, rocketing into the top 10 Switch sales, and selling a good chunk of DLC on the back end. And they could still get my sale at another time if I see a good deal. The people who are upset now are core Nintendo fans who feel burnt and excluded. The loud complaints may signal rejection of Nintendo, Or they may just signal that people are passionate and that passion means that these people are still far softer targets to buy the Nintendo console in the medium term than some of the other markets that they're trying to pursue. You can bet that a good number of the drop the price spammers are already busily arranging their pre-orders and that many of the rest of them will grit their teeth and swallow the prices. Reluctant purchases are still purchases, and for Nintendo's point of view, there's actually some merit to tempering early demand, given that supply of new consoles is always a vexed issue. They also have a huge inbuilt audience to serve and no real competitor in their space. Steam Deck style handhelds aren't really in the same race, but nor are Sony and Microsoft direct competitors in this space either. Finally, though, all of this assumes that Nintendo will stand still as the world burns. But Nintendo has a huge history of innovation, and I don't think they're done yet. Switch 2 is a very iterative console, but that's because they hit upon something that worked big time and they want to double down on it. Fair enough. But they know that they will need to stay ahead of the market, and so I could see in years to come them launching Switch 2 accessories or parallel consoles that experiment with different ideas, shades of how they floated the Virtual Boy and DS as third pillars before abandoning and embracing them respectively. I think there's a 90% chance that Nintendo will sell more than 5 million copies in the first fiscal year, which would put the console above Wii U. What about 10 million, which is more in line with the DS and Wii, which of course had early supply issues bottlenecking its production? Well, maybe 70%. 15 million then, roughly on par with the early Switch? 50% perhaps? It's only when we get into 20 million territory that things get dicier, with a whole host of issues, including supply considerations, likely holding it back from these kinds of rocket numbers yet, but it's not completely out of the question, and I would still put this at 30%, given that it does seem to be Nintendo's target, and although they've been wrong before, they've also been right quite often as well. Basically, while the circumstances look bad, the fundamentals look good. Nintendo is a very old company and they have been successful for a long time. They can navigate some choppy seas. And speaking of navigating, why not navigate over to these great videos or check out the Patreon? Meanwhile, a big thanks to you for watching, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.